From the lab to your ears, you are listening to WonderLabs.
Hey everyone, and welcome to WonderLabs. This is Chris Richardson checking in from the Okinawa Institute of Science and Technology, OIST. Today you're in for a treat, because in this episode, I speak with Nadine Wirkuttis. Nadine is a researcher in OIST's cognitive neurorobotics unit. She focuses on cognitive development in humans and artificial agents, with an emphasis on the development of higher cognitive functions arising from critical learning periods. Basically, using humanoid robots to understand human social interaction. Just to be clear, I'll say that again. Nadine is using robots as a model to understand humans. She's not building social robots. Indeed, as she points out, that technology is lagging behind even the simple devices we now carry in our pockets. So in this conversation, we look at what robots can teach us about ourselves. We talk about algorithms as black boxes, and the challenges of explainability once we deploy these technologies in society. We also talk about the Bayesian predictive brain, how the brain makes sense of the world using statistical models. We discuss Nadine's recent work on robot-robot interaction, and I'd strongly suggest checking out a short video, Spontaneous Interactions Between Two Robots, to see them in action. This is linked in the show notes. Finally, we talk about scaling the technology up to the level of society, including applications in patient care and political decision-making. Oh, and we also discuss the worrying, or perhaps not so worrying case of the robots who learn to lie. This one was a lot of fun, and left me with hope that there probably is a place for we simple humans living in meat space, at least for the time being. Without further ado, please enjoy this conversation with Nadine Wirkuttis. And remember, Nadine can't build you a robot. Nadine.
Hello.
Thank you for joining us today. Maybe you can just begin by introducing yourself.
Thanks for inviting me. My name is Nadine Wirkuttis, and I'm using robotic systems to study social interaction. In particular, I try to understand how we humans adapt in different types of social situations.
And what's your overall motivation for exploring this space?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So after I finished my studies in information engineering and management, I worked for several years for the automotive industry as an IT consultant. And back then, we started introducing more and more intelligent technologies into the cars. And we all have heard about autonomous driving these days. And the discussions were not only about technology, but also about the ethical implications these autonomous vehicles might have for us in the future. So let me give you one example. So for example, when we humans drive and we see like a soccer ball rolling onto the road, we intuitively know, okay, there might be a kid running behind it or another human. So we will try to stop our car, we will try to swerve to the side if we feel like, okay, we cannot stop anymore. But this is kind of a natural behavior for us. But when we try to develop cars now that drive autonomously for us, then those cars have to have these intelligence and these intuitions. And a big ethical discussion now evolved. What is the right thing for the car to do? Because there's always the risk. I can risk other pedestrians, or I can risk the people sitting in the car, in the vehicle. And there are huge discussions evolving around that. And this is one problem we have, that we don't agree what would be the right things to do. So there are questions we ask. There are big studies where we try to find out how humans would behave. And it was found, so a big study from MIT, that tried to analyze how humans would behave in these situations. And the problem is that depending on the region and on our age, on our ethnic origin, we have different opinions on that. So we don't agree necessarily how this car would behave. And on the other side, even if we knew some rules, what would be the best thing to do for the car, it's kind of hard to implement because the algorithms we are using are kind of black boxes.
What do you mean by a black box?
So when we talk about black boxes in terms of algorithms, what we mean is that we don't understand the logic behind the algorithms. So we can think about artificial neural networks, for example. These networks or these algorithms try to imitate kind of the structure of our brain. We have a lot of neurons that communicate, have some mathematical calculations in the background. And even though we might see all these calculations, we don't see the logic behind it. So we don't see the reasoning why the algorithm might make a particular decision in the end. And this can be a problem. So transparency in that case, which we have with the algorithms, is not necessarily explainability. So when we talk about autonomous vehicles again and other algorithms that have implications on our personal lives, we need liability for the systems and so on. And then we have to have the requirement that an algorithm is explainable.
So there's a big issue then around explainability, as in justifying the decision that an algorithm has reached and kind of understanding the process by which it got there. And that obviously has big implications when you start building systems that have important positions in society, whether it's in transportation or healthcare or education. How is your work helping to explore explainability?
So I try to move away from just asking people how they would behave. I thought it would be rather good to understand how we humans make the decisions. So what are the cognitive mechanisms behind that allow us to make these decisions? And by understanding how we humans make the decisions, we could potentially build algorithms that are explainable and make the right decisions in the end. So this is what led me to my current work. So when we try to understand how we humans make decisions, then there are many variables involved, which makes a complete analysis almost impossible. So for example, we have a conversation right now and we both have we see something, we have some memories about the past, and we naturally adapt to all these things. So I'm speaking now, you're listening and you are nodding. So I think, okay, this makes sense what I'm saying. And sometimes I see question marks, so I will repeat or like give more explanations. So yeah, I guess we humans do a lot of things naturally, but
a bit of a black box in itself.
Exactly. It's the same. It's the same like the algorithms. We have a black box. So even though we could look into our brain to some extent in living organisms, we still don't understand the full extent of human decision-making and how we make decisions when other people are involved. And that's how I came to the work, what I'm currently doing. So I was thinking or trying to think of a minimalistic example how we humans interact, that we can study in a setting without noise, that we can control entirely. And this is where robots can help us, because when we use robots, we can basically decide everything. What experience does this robot have? What memory function does it have? What type of individual traits does it have? And this is how I came to my current work.
So you are using robotics to study human social behavior. And for us sitting across this table, we have a lot of prior expectations and experiences that we're bringing to this, but robotics as a system allow you to kind of control all of those different parameters. How specifically are you using robots? How exactly are you studying them?
Yeah, so we have an architecture implemented into the robot that is inspired by neuroscience. There's a theory called active inference, and it kind of gives an explanation about embodied cognition. So what this means is, it's basically theories centered around the Bayesian brain. So the Bayesian brain theory basically tells that we humans model the world based on statistical principles. What this means is, for example, that when we see an apple, to give a random example, that we would not save in our brain every apple we ever saw in our lives, but we would have some idea how an apple looks like. That is about 10 centimeters. It might be red, it might be green, and it might have some variations. And our brain supposedly does this with everything we perceive. And by seeing more and more apples, we form these prior expectations. So whenever we see something with 10 centimeters about red-green color, then we might think, okay, it's an apple. Can be something else, but this is the assumption we have. And the brain not only passively perceives constantly, so we will have these expectations. And whenever these expectations are not met, we will get surprised. We will get kind of a prediction error. That's how we call it in neuroscience.
So when you move to Japan and the apples are about 4 times the size, for instance.
Exactly. I got very surprised. And that's now where we humans have to update our beliefs and our prior expectations, because I just have to accept that apples in Japan might be 4 times the size than I was used in Europe. Exactly. And we call this phenomena perceptual inference. And now there is a second aspect to it, the embodied aspect that I mentioned before, is that we humans don't have a brain that is just like a virtual thing. No, it has a body. And our body is means to interact with the environment. So basically everything we do or think or feel will have some type of expression, facial expression, or we act upon it. And this is considered active inference. So we have 2 types of inferences, perceptual inference and active inference. And basically all we do is try to minimize these surprises we have in the world by either acting or just saying an apple might be a bit bigger.
So when you've been using these cute little humanoid robots, what have you found so far?
So we implemented this active inference theory into the robots and conducted some experiments how these robots can interact with each other. And depending on how we set up our architecture or how we tune it, we can find that the robots are more or less likely to be adaptable when they interact with each other. So for example, we have one robot that is very unlikely to adapt to a specific social interaction. So the robot realizes that the other robot wants to have some interactions, for example, that they're imitating each other, which is a very natural behavior that we humans learn when we grow up. And the robot refuses it. It realizes the other robot wants me to imitate it, but it refuses to do it. And there are different experimental studies that show that other robots are more adaptable. And what we found so far is that depending on how sensitive we are on our prior beliefs, that what we said, for example, an apple is around 10 centimeters, how likely are we to update these beliefs? And if we are not very likely to do so, we are not very good in adapting to different situations. And this complies with findings that were reported, for example, from neuroscience or psychology when we studied psychological disorders. Similar things were found, for example, in schizophrenia or in autism, where children have problems adapting to different social situations.
And I believe there's actually a video online where you can see some of these different robots in action and the sort of their different ability to imitate or to defy and not imitate.
Mm-hmm.
So based on these findings, how do you think this might be applied into a quote-unquote real-world scenario?
There are many applications we can think of. And the one that I'm most interested in is what I mentioned in the beginning, that it's very challenging to really understand human social interaction in its detail, and theories we find out there, sometimes controversial or not reported to their full extent.
What controversial examples are there?
For example, when we think about why we humans socially interact, we find theories that say we humans need a shared goal in order to do so. We have to have some idea what the outcome of our interaction should be. And others say that's not necessarily the case. Sometimes we just need that interactions evolve spontaneously, and we don't necessarily need a shared goal for that, which happens basically every day to me when I come to work, that I have a spontaneous interaction with my colleagues and friends that I meet. And others again say sometimes we just enjoy doing things together. We're hiking a mountain. That doesn't necessarily mean that we have the goal to climb the summit. Sometimes we just enjoy the action with each other, dancing, hiking. And by doing this research I'm doing now, I hope that we can resolve some of these confusions. And as I said, in the case of the robots that I found, the social interaction is supposed, as I said, like to have some intention. And this intention has to be shared, which we kind of can confirm with the study I did. Because if a robot has only a strong intention to do whatever it has in mind and not the intention to interact with the other robot, we see that it refuses to adapt to the situation. And I think that's the beauty about the work we are doing. So we can tune the experiments according to the confusions we want to resolve in the human realm. And that's basically what interests me. I'm interested in the humans. The robots, in my case, is a tool to do so. And by doing so, there are fields evolved or slowly evolving, like computational psychiatry, where people try to build computational models to verify some theories we have about human behavior. And by using robots, we can more and more introduce the idea of embodied cognition. So it's a big stream of researchers that believe that when we think about human cognition, which is learning, attention, we should consider the embodied version, the whole human, and not just the brain and the mechanisms that happen there.
So this is one line of research where the theory can really transcend the academic disciplines and really be applied to quite a number of unexpected places in society. Where else do you imagine that it might be useful?
So basically, we talked about very minimalistic example, but we could think of scaling this up to whole societies. And I know that there are thoughts about how it would be when we, for example, test or evaluate political decisions on that scale, that we use robots to see the wider implications of some political decisions and not just immediate consequences, but also the long-term and maybe not predictable things that we have simulations in an actual real-world example, which is kind of far away because the research we are currently doing is social interaction in a very minimalistic way. But in the future, we should think about using robotic systems more in these fields. There are further applications that are currently tested, and also in some, even in Japan, they already started doing it, that robots are used for elderly care, not necessarily for the healthcare, but more like for engaging elderly people, and especially people with Alzheimer's. It was shown that robots can help them to recall past memories much better than a human caretaker could do. And same for humans, that we humans sometimes are able to learn better and to be better in paying attention and grasp new concepts better. But it's in the very beginning. We still don't know why this actually happens, why the robot is, and it doesn't even have to be a humanoid robot. It doesn't have to look like a human. It's enough if this robot has 2 eyes and a cute nose for the kids or the elderly people to engage. Yeah.
Or indeed with concepts like the uncanny valley, where if a robot is almost human-like but just not quite, and something's a little bit off kilter, that can be quite disconcerting. So maybe if we do stick to the slightly cuter, more lovable robots, that might be a better thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Your work would ultimately be applicable for situations where we have human-humanoid coexistence and ensuring that we have robots with a good understanding of our wants and needs for those interactions to be smooth. Given that we often don't understand our own wants and needs very well, how can we expect that from a robot?
I think there are good reasons why we humans sometimes don't understand each other. And I guess by understanding, again, like the cognitive mechanisms behind, we will find why some of us are better in understanding and anticipating behaviors of others, and some of us have more effort to put into understand and anticipate others' behaviors. And the challenging and a big ethical question would be, how do you want to design the robot? In the end, someone has to decide how much should it adapt, how much should it tell the truth, what are the moral decisions it takes. We know that we humans have different ideas and moral values, but in the end, we still have to have a public discussion.
So I think the ethical considerations are very interesting. Have you come across the example of the robots who learned to lie? So from my understanding, they had a set of robots in a space with access to either a good food source or a poisonous food, and they were programmed to flash a light to notify other robots in the area when they came across a good food source. And then the most successful robots were bred to make a next generation, and over time, they found that initially the robots stopped alerting the other robots when they found a good food source, so they just kept the resource for themselves, and then eventually started misdirecting, lying to other robots to point them to the poisonous food source or something irrelevant. What are the implications of these kinds of behaviors that evolve in these systems?
I guess here we can go back to the issue we mentioned in the beginning about explainability of algorithms. Because in this case, what happened is that we gave a goal to the robots. Again, social interaction. Do we have a goal? And if the goal is I find food source and I try to survive, then I will do things to accomplish this goal. And this might be lying. And it's interesting, of course, that the robots started doing the same thing like we humans supposedly sometimes do to each other in order to reach our goals. But I think by understanding, again, the mechanisms, what happens in our brain, and designing not necessarily goals for the robots in that sense, or try to design them very carefully, we can avoid this behavior. But yeah, that's what happens. Yeah.
Or maybe it says more about the person that programmed this particular study rather than human nature more broadly. But, well, before I let you get back to your robots, there's one question I know that you're very tired of answering. So I'm going to ask you and just see what your current answer is. Can you build me a robot?
I cannot build you a robot.
Can't or won't, okay. We do like to wrap things up with a quick fire round.
Okay, shoot.
Can you explain in a few words what it is that you do?
I use robots to study social human interaction.
Which emerging field in science or technology are you most excited about?
Human-inspired artificial intelligence.
What is a common misconception about your area of research? Something that if you could wave a magic wand and erase it from everybody's collective memory, what would that be?
We are not building social robots. We just use robots as tools.
So you can't build me a robot.
No.
Do you have a tool that you use in your work that you're particularly fond of using?
I have a controller to manipulate the motions of my humanoid robots.
Wait, so you're pulling the strings like a puppeteer?
That's how it looks like.
Do you have a favorite science-related joke or fact for us?
Most of our smartphones are much smarter than all the humanoids we have out there.
And maybe humans too. Well, Nadine, thank you so much. Where can people go to find out more about your work?
So on our group website of Cognitive Neurorobotics Unit, OIST Graduate University, you will find more information about the entire work of the group, which is related to how we can use robot for studying human cognition, not just social interaction. So there are many interesting things to explore, and we link to our publications there.
Nadine, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for tuning into WonderLabs. If you enjoyed this episode, please take a moment to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with others who you think might enjoy it. You can also email us at wonderlabspod@gmail.com. This is your host, Chris Richardson. Our brand was designed by Lloyd Preston Allen, and our jingle was produced by T. Fitzgerald at For The Record. You can find more music from For The Record at soundcloud.com/WEAREFTR. Special thanks go out to Liliana Laborde-Dozian. We'll see you next time.